Welcome to the analysis of Rossetti's Maude Clare. So, in summary, this poem is an exploration of the disparity in gender expectations and gender roles, and it's also an exploration of the fallen woman, as so many of Rossetti's poems are. Remember, contextually, she worked in a penitentiary for fallen women, so this occupied a lot of her time, a lot of her mind, and a lot of her messages were about trying to avoid this fate. So we begin with somebody following this married couple out of the church, and we assume it's Maude Clare. It is a storytelling form like a lot of Rossetti's other poems, Goblin Market for example, Apple Gathering as well. 12 quatrains and an ABCB rhyme scheme, so quite a predictable rhyme scheme, roughly equal metre, and the word choices are mostly monosyllabic, so quite a simple structure, quite a simple form. It's more focusing on the message rather than the actual form in which it is written. So it starts with an exposition like a story would, in which the characters are introduced and the story is set. The fact that she follows this couple out of the church could suggest inferiority for Maude Clare, that she is following behind them. However, the fact that she's described as having a lofty step could suggest confidence, which is a contrast to the idea of her being inferior. So it kind of leaves the reader unsure as to whether Maude Clare is someone we should feel sympathy for or somebody we should be slightly wary of. And then there's a contrast between these two characters. So obviously we've got the bride and then we've got Maude Clare. The bride is described like a village maid, and that kind of gives those pastoral images of someone who may be quite unattractive, perhaps not very clever, quite simple, quite plain, compared with Maude Clare, who is like a queen, and this simile suggests an exoticism to her. It could be a real comparison or it could be an imagined comparison. It could be the way that Rossetti thinks that Maude Clare views herself, and perhaps she feels like she is better than the bride. However, comparing herself to a queen may also suggest that she's unattainable, or that vanity perhaps makes her less likely to be married and a less desirable bride. So the second stanza again fits into the storytelling form because it's part of dialogue, and this is where the mother is introduced, and we are also told who the groom is. His name is Thomas. So more characters introduced and the story is developed. So in this dialogue, the mother basically reveals that she's had a really successful marriage, and she uses the collective noun we when she's talking about herself and her husband. And does that suggest that it's happy, or does it just suggest that it's successful? It's unclear, and she talks on behalf of both herself and her husband, which could allude to the fact that there's a disjoint between them. This links to traditional marriage values, especially in the Victorian time. She says, "May Nell and you but live as true as we have done for years." So it doesn't suggest that you should be happy together, or you should be exciting together, or you should be passionate together. It just says you should be loyal to each other, and that is what is required of a traditional Victorian marriage. And then she also describes the fact that Thomas's father looked the same as he did 30 years ago, and he was about to get married, so maybe a bit sheepish, maybe a bit worried. And perhaps that's the expectation of males in society, that they don't really want to get married, they just have to because that's what society expects of them. So perhaps it's linking to undue expectations of both males and females in Victorian society. But there's this connective of the but, which hints at a discord between the mother and father's relationship and Thomas and Nell's relationship, when she says, "He was not so pale as you, nor I so pale as Nell." So The comparison between the mother and the father's relationship and marriage compared with Nell and Thomas's suggests that there might be a lack of success brewing for Nell and Thomas. The repetition of the fact that they're both pale is ambiguous in its meaning. Could suggest that they're nervous or scared or excited. We don't really know, but perhaps this repetition suggests a join between them, that they are quite similar to each other. They're both feeling nervous or anxious. And in this stanza, the narrator refers to my lord, and the narrator is ambiguous. We don't know who's narrating the poem, but it suggests a subservience to Thomas, or could just be using the storytelling narrative style in the way that she talks about Thomas. So Thomas is described as being pale with inward strife, so he's stressed. However, Nell is described as being pale with pride, and there's a disparity in emotions between Thomas and Nell, which again repeats this discord between them and repeats this lack of connection between them. So he's stressed out, he's pale because he doesn't really want to get married, or there's something on his mind, whereas she's pale because she's so excited to be married and she can't believe that she's getting married to Thomas. And the fact that my lord gazed long upon pale Maude Clare is the first indication of what the issue between the married couple might be. And the fact that he's gazing at somebody else whilst he's getting married or has just got married is a massive indication that something is wrong. And the use of the word long emphasises the gaze. He doesn't just glance at Maude Clare, he gazes at her for a long time, which could suggest sexual attraction or longing. And then there's a change in tone in the next stanza where Maude Clare is introduced. We get her voice now. So far we've had the narrator and the mother, and now we've got Maude Clare talking. This is quite an ominous stanza because she comes to the wedding or just after the wedding and says that she has a gift for Thomas. And she says, "I have brought my gift, my lord, have brought my gift." So this repeated message adds gravitas to what she says because of the repetition, and really builds suspense as to what the gift is that she's brought. As a reader, you kind of think that it's not going to be a positive gift. She refers to him as my lord, which could be respectful because she loves him or because of the patriarchy, or it could be patronising because she's angry with him for whatever reason that we don't really know yet. Obviously, you get the impression that there's some sort of jilted lover essence going on after this marriage. She repeats the idea that she's going to bless him 3 times, and the repeated blessings could be happy because she's glad that they are getting married, or it could suggest danger because it's almost like she says it way too many times for it to be sincere. And this isolated line at the end, so she blesses the hearth, she blesses the board, so typical marital images. And then her final line, she says to bless the marriage bed. And the fact that this is an isolated line implies that this might be where most help is needed. So this perhaps is quite scathing in that she's kind of wishing Nell good luck because she's going to need it. Then her tone becomes slightly more melancholy or angry depending on how you read it. So the fact that she is now giving things back suggests a separation, and she says, "Here's my half of the golden chain." So she's giving something back to Thomas that he gave to her. And it suggests separation because of the half. The fact that it's golden suggests that it was precious, and this is very similar to Laura's hair in Goblin Market, so we know already that anything golden is valuable in Rossetti's poetry. However, it is a golden chain rather than a ring, so there was no marriage intention between them. The golden chain is almost just a token of affection rather than a token of commitment in the way that a marriage would be. She says he wore it about his neck. So again, you could interpret this in many ways. It could be that he wore it about his neck because it was precious, or it could be symbolic of control. So the fact that he had to wear it around his neck suggests perhaps ownership on the part of Maude Clare. And then her memory of them wading ankle deep in the river suggests a positive memory, and then we get the impression as the reader that they did have a life together or some sort of relationship together, which is quite similar to an apple gathering where the narrator talks about the couple hanging around down at the lane and having giggly conversations with each other. But the fact that they wade ankle deep could suggest that it's a superficial relationship because they never got deep into the water. So if you looked at it metaphorically, it could suggest a superficial relationship. The memory is frivolous, so it seems like they had fun, but that was pretty much it. Or you could interpret the verb waded as effort. So perhaps it actually wasn't as frivolous as it seemed. It took a lot of effort on both of their parts. And we see this repeated image of lilies in many of Rossetti's poems. Again, an ambiguous meaning. It could be death, it could be purity, but either way, that's what they were looking for. So does it symbolise the end of their relationship, or does it symbolise that they were looking for a return to purity in their relationship? Then she goes on to returning her half of the faded leaves. So this is a sentimental image, because she gives back something that was important to her, which may seem trivial to other people. But this pastoral imagery implies a purity to her feelings about the relationship, that she kept those faded leaves as a memento. And the fact that they plucked them from the budding bough again links to apple gathering, which suggests this warning of plucking too soon, which links to virginity perhaps, and not being ready. And they seem so trivial when they did it. They didn't really think about the consequences. And again, there's always this warning from Rossetti about having sex too soon and enjoying sex outside of marriage, which ends in disaster for women. And the fact that the bough was budding suggests potential perhaps in their relationship, or could suggest immaturity in both of the characters. And then at the end of this stanza, Maude Clare suggests that the lilies are budding now. And this again is very similar to apple gathering, where the character goes back to the orchard and she sees that all of the apple trees are now full with apples, whereas she plucked the blossom too soon and didn't wait for the apples to grow. This is very similar to Maude Clare, where they plucked the buds and didn't wait for the lilies to grow. So this again is a suggestion of regret and a warning to women to wait. So change in structure, where there's action from Thomas now, which could be considered a feminist perspective because he is almost silenced by Maude Clare and he has to wait his turn to talk. The fact that he strives to meet her in the way that she reacts could suggest that he doesn't feel the same as her. So he has this lack of feeling. He can't really match her feelings because he doesn't care, or could suggest an inferiority. He's almost emasculated because she kind of shot him down and he can't respond to it. And again, this is emphasised by the fact that he falters, which could be read as him feeling impersonal towards her, or perhaps he's bereft because he's so upset about what's happened between them, or could suggest a weakness. He refers to Maude Clare as lady, which could be viewed as a polite way of speaking to her, or a very formal way of speaking to her, which again is very impersonal, so he distances himself from her. The dashes in his speech suggest incoherence, and perhaps the repetition of his name could suggest that he's overcome with emotion. So it's really difficult to understand or make a firm decision on how he feels about Maude Clare. And he doesn't really get to say anything, but he hides his face, which could be symbolic of shame or guilt, or the fact that he's crying. So again, an ambiguous interpretation. The confrontation between Thomas and Maude Clare is a feminist ideal because, unlike apple gathering, Maude Clare is able to demand the answers of her lover. She's able to confront him with how she feels. And then the female characters interact in the next stanza. Perhaps this is quite surprising in the way that Maude Clare turns to Nell, and she's actually quite cordial to her. She calls her my lady Nell, which is a respectful way of talking to her. It might also be considered to be quite pitying or patronising, because she feels sorry for her that she's with a man who cannot be loyal to anybody. So she repeats that she has a gift now for Nell. She's given her gifts to Thomas and now she's moving on to Nell. But she gives Nell incomplete gifts. So she said, if it were a fruit, the bloom were gone, or were it flowers, the dew. So the things that she gives to Nell are lacking in some way, which could symbolise the incomplete marriage that Nell has just signed up to. The sentiment seems unnatural, which could suggest that this is a spiteful gift from Maude Clare towards Nell. And then the semicolon after she says, I have a gift for you, builds tension like it did previously. So the empowered tone from Maude Clare with her imperatives in the way that she talks to Nell contrasts with the previous stanzas. So before she seemed a bit sad, a bit melancholy, and now she seems to have reasserted herself and got a hold of herself. And she talks about the fickle heart that she shared with Thomas, and that's a reference to his disloyalty. And she says, you can have this now, I don't want it. And the paltry love emphasises the inadequacy of the relationship between her and Thomas, and perhaps the inadequacy of him as a partner in general. The possessive pronouns used of mine and my suggest that she at one point owned Thomas and now he's almost tainted because he's used property. And this is quite a feminist perspective, because women were generally seen as tainted if they had had a previous relationship. And actually what Rossetti does here is she flips that on its head and makes it seem like Thomas is also tainted by having a premarital relationship. She says to Nell, take it or leave it as you will, which implies that Nell has a choice, which obviously she didn't have much of a choice, but this could be a feminist comment on the fact that women should have been able to choose whether they remained in a marriage or not. And you can link this back to the contextual laws surrounding divorce and the Matrimony Act and those kinds of things that forbade women from divorcing their husbands. It could be a comment on the plight of a wife. So she says, take it or leave it as you will, but Nell has already married Thomas, so what choice does she actually have now? She can't leave her husband. That's not an option for her. And then finally, Nell replies. And the fact that she replies last could be empowering because she gets the final say, or could be disempowering because she hasn't had a chance to speak until the very end, so everything's been done to her. However, the articulation of Nell's speech in comparison to Thomas's suggests that she is much more equipped to deal with these emotions and these confrontations than Thomas was, or perhaps it's because she just feels more than Thomas does. So the juxtaposition of leave and take and spurn and wear implies a stoicism in Nell, perhaps because she does love him, or because this is the card she's been dealt now. She has to stay with Thomas, so she almost has to be proud about what she's doing, which could suggest a naivety in her actions. She refers to him as my lord for better or worse, which is a patriarchal statement because she becomes the angel in the house, which is Patmore's theory of what makes a perfect woman in the Victorian period. And also linked to Barry's comment about marriage inexorably locks women into a social system. So she's trapped within this system now, for better or worse. There's nothing she can do. She'll have to take what Maude Clare has spurned, and she'll have to wear it because that's her situation. She's very similar to Lizzie in Goblin Market in the fact that she is so stoic and almost takes on this Jesus-like aura with the fact that she just gets on with things. And the fact that at the end she says, and him I love, Maude Clare, could be regarded as a secondary point. So the fact that, first of all, she says he's my lord, for better or worse, so she stays with him because he is her lord. And then secondly, she says I love him. Or it could be her final point. That is the most important thing, is that she loves him. And then in the final stanza, the tripling of taller, wise, fair suggests that Nell is aware that Maude Clare is much better than her, and these are the features of a woman that make them better or more attractive. And this is a comment on the societal expectations of women. So we get the impression that Maude Clare is the girl to have around on the weekends and have sexual encounters with because she's beautiful and she's wise and she's fair and tall. However, somebody like Nell is the woman that you would marry because she's loyal and she's stoic. And this is an impossible combination for women to be both of these things. She says she'll love him till he loves me best. So this commitment to her husband could be admirable. It could make her seem really stupid, or it could make her seem really desperate. Or again, it's a link to pride because she has to put up with him now. She has no choice. And the final line suggests a strength in her. So she says, I will do this and I will be with my husband. However, the repetition of Maude Clare's name right at the end, the final thing that she says, suggests that their marriage will always be haunted by Maude Clare.